ridiculous. I demand to speak to your manager immediately. I am not paying for this awful service.
You know, there's a specific kind of silence that falls over a gas station right before a storm hits. Not a weather storm with thunder and rain, but a human storm wrapped in a floral blouse and driving a pristine white SUV. That costs more than my entire college education. I was standing there behind the counter of the pump and pantry. Just a regular Tuesday morning smelling like day-old coffee and floor wax, when Mrs. Patricia Garrison, the self-appointed queen of the Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association, marched through the automatic doors like she was invading a small country she intended to colonize. She didn't walk. She stomped with this terrifying, rhythmic precision, her heels clicking on the linoleum like a countdown timer. And she slapped her designer handbag onto the counter right next to the display of beef jerky, with enough force to make the lottery ticket machine rattle. I looked up, giving her my standard customer service smile, the one that doesn't quite reach the eyes. And before I could even get a good morning out, she pointed a manicured finger at pump number 4 and barked, "Fill it up, premium only, and charge it to the Silver Creek Hoa community account," as if she were ordering a martini at a country club. Instead of demanding 20 gallons of unleaded from a guy making $12 an hour, I blinked, genuinely confused for a second, because in the 7 years I've worked this register, we have never, not once, had a community account for a neighborhood, let alone one for Silver Creek, which is that fortress of a subdivision up the hill where the grass is measured with laser levels, and the residents probably fine each other for sneezing too loud. So I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the counter, and said as politely as I could, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have a billing account for the Hoa. You'll have to swipe your card or pay cash inside before I can authorize the pump." And I swear to you, the air in the room temperature dropped 10 degrees. She froze, her eyes narrowing into these little slits of pure judgment, and she looked at me like I was a smudge on her otherwise perfect reality, and she said, "Excuse me. Do you know who I am? I am Patricia Garrison, president of the board, and considering this eyesore of a gas station borders our property, providing essential fuel services to board members is the least you can do to compensate for the light pollution you cause." That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to be a normal transaction. This was a hostage situation, and I was the hostage. I tried to explain, calm and steady, "Ma'am, I can't just give away gas. That's theft. And I'm not the owner. I'm just the guy who makes the coffee." But she wasn't listening. She was already reaching into her purse, not for a wallet, but for her phone. She held it up like a weapon, hit speed dial, and staring me dead in the eye with this terrifyingly smug grin, she said, "I am calling the police to report a theft of services and discrimination against a community leader." And before I could even process the absurdity of that sentence, she was screaming, literally screaming into the receiver, "He's holding my car hostage. He's refusing legal tender. I feel threatened." I stood there, jaw practically on the floor, watching her perform this one-woman show of victimization while my co-worker, Chloe, who was 22 and has seen everything, just slowly lowered her magazine and whispered, "Dude, I think she's actually trying to get you arrested for not letting her rob us." And she was right. 10 minutes later, a cruiser pulls up, and out steps Deputy Miller, a guy I've known since high school, looking tired before his shift even started. And he walks in to find Patricia Garrison hyperventilating by the slushy machine, pointing at me like I'm some kind of hardened criminal. She launched into this tirade about how the Hoa bylaws, which she apparently thought applied to the entire county, stated that local businesses had a duty of care to the association, and by denying her gas, I was violating her civil rights and causing her emotional distress. Miller just listened, chewing on the end of his pen, looking from her to me, and finally, he cut her off and said, "Mum, did you pay for the gas?" And when she scoffed and said payment was a civil matter to be invoiced later, he let out this long, heavy sigh and said, "Mrs. Garrison, this is a private business. If you take the gas without paying, that's larceny. And calling 911 because a clerk won't give you free product is a misuse of emergency services." And then he wrote her a ticket right there in front of the beef jerky. You would have thought he slapped her across the face. The color drained out of her, then rushed back in a shade of angry purple I didn't know existed in nature. And she snatched the ticket, looked at me with eyes that promised nothing short of total annihilation, and hissed, "You have made a very powerful enemy today, young man," before storming out. I thought that was it. I really did. I thought she'd go home, scream into a pillow, and maybe write a nasty Yelp review. But I underestimated the sheer, boundless energy of a woman with too much time and a desperate need for control. The next morning, I pulled into the lot, and my stomach dropped because there, standing on the sidewalk right at the entrance to our pumps, was a picket line, literally a picket line for women in matching beige polo shirts holding signs that looked like they were printed at a professional shop. Boycott the pump and pantry, justice for Silver Creek, and my personal favorite, and economic discrimination against homeowners. And leading the charge was Patricia, holding a megaphone that was entirely too loud for 7 a.m., chanting about how I was a tyrant who hated community values, that it was ridiculous. Absolutely. But it was also terrifying because in a small town like ours, noise attracts attention, and Patricia was making a lot of noise. Cars were slowing down, people were taking videos, and within an hour, my boss, Mr. Henderson, was blowing up my phone asking why the hell the HOA was declaring war on his business. I tried to explain, but how do you explain to a corporate district manager that a lady is trying to shut us down because she didn't want to pay $40 for premium? The day turned into a circus. Patricia and her safety committee spent the entire shift documenting violations, taking pictures of a cracked sidewalk tile, claiming our air pump was a noise nuisance, harassment of customers by handing out pamphlets that claimed our gas was low quality, and damaging to luxury engines. Chloe, God bless her, tried to fight back with humor. She went out there with a tray of free donuts and offered them to the protesters, saying, "You guys look hungry from all that oppression," which made two of the ladies crack a smile until Patricia swatted the donuts away, like they were poisoned. But the real escalation, the moment I realized this woman wasn't just mad but calculating, came around noon when the guys in cheap suits walked in, flashed some laminated badges that looked like they came from a cereal box, and claimed they were independent auditors hired by the community to inspect our fuel tanks. For compliance, I knew it was bogus. I knew she had sent them to harass us, to find something, anything, she could use to bury us in fines or lawsuits. I stood my ground, told them to get lost unless they had a warrant, but they stood there taking notes, muttering about leaks and fumes loud enough for customers to hear, scaring off a couple of regulars, and I could feel the walls closing in. Patricia wasn't just throwing a tantrum anymore. She was trying to destroy my livelihood, trying to get the station condemned or me fired, just to prove she had the power to do it. I went home that night feeling this heavy weight in my chest, the kind of stress that keeps you staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering if I should just quit, just walk away and let her win, because who fights in HOA president and survives? She had the money, she had the time, and she had a terrifying lack of shame. But then, lying there in the dark, I remembered something Deputy Miller had said, something about her bylaws only applying to the HOA, and I got to thinking, if she's so obsessed with rules, so obsessed with the letter of the law, maybe it's time someone held a mirror up to her. I wasn't going to quit, I wasn't going to run. I was going to find out exactly how deep her corruption went, because you don't act that entitled, you don't demand free stuff and misuse police resources, unless you've been getting away with it for a long, long time. The next morning, I didn't go in looking defeated. I went in looking for a fight, and I brought backup in the form of my cousin Vinny, who isn't a lawyer, but he's a drone enthusiast with a 4K camera and a lot of free time. We set up a little counter-surveillance of our own, documenting her documenting us, recording her blocking the driveway, recording her screaming at customers, building a file of harassment that was thick enough to choke a horse. But Patricia, she had one more card to play, and it was a big one. Around 2 p.m. on Thursday, a black sedan pulls up, and out steps the mayor, Mayor Donovan, a guy who usually only shows up for ribbon cuttings and parades. Patricia practically sprinted over to him, crocodile tears flowing instantly, grabbing his arm and pointing at me through the window, wailing about how I had verbally assaulted her, how the station was a blight, how we needed to be rezoned immediately for the safety of the neighborhood. I watched from behind the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs, thinking this was it. She got the mayor. She's going to get our license pulled. I'm done. The mayor listened, nodding gravely, looking over at the store. And then he started walking towards the entrance, with Patricia trailing behind him, looking like the cat who ate the canary. I braced myself, wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans, and prepared to be fired, evicted, and run out of town. But when the door opened, the mayor didn't look angry. He looked tired. He walked up to the counter, Patricia hovering over his shoulder with that smug, triumphant grin, and he looked at me and asked, "Son, is it true you refused this woman service?" I took a deep breath, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "No, Mr. Mayor, I refuse to give her free gas and charge it to a non-existent account." And then she blocked my business for 3 days. The mayor turned slowly to look at Patricia, and the silence that stretched between them was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Patricia's smile faltered, just a fraction, and she started to stammer, "Well, it's about the principle, Gerald. It's about respect for the community leaders." And that's when I saw it, the crack in the armor, the moment where her narrative started to crumble against the hard wall of reality. But I knew the mayor wasn't enough. Politicians are slippery. They want to make everyone happy. I needed something nuclear. I needed to blow her credibility so wide open that even her own board couldn't ignore it. And that's when Chloe, who had been quietly typing away on her phone in the corner, looked up with a wicked glint in her eye and whispered, "Hey, Jack, you know how the whole website has a public forum for emergency concerns? Well, I just live-streamed her screaming at the mayor to the entire neighborhood group chat. And I think people are starting to wake up." I watched Chloe's phone screen as the viewer count on the live stream ticked up 10, 50, 100, and the comments started rolling in faster than the pump meter on a diesel truck. At first, it was just confusion. Neighbors asking why their HOA president was screaming at the mayor in a gas station parking lot. But then, the tone shifted. See, Patricia had made a lot of enemies over the years, people she'd find for leaving tricycles in the driveway, for painting their shutters eggshell instead of cream, for laughing too loud in their own backyards, and seeing her unhinged, seeing her exposed without her gavel and her podium. It broke the spell. The mayor, realizing he was being broadcast to the very voters he needed, suddenly straightened his spine, stepped away from Patricia, and said, loud and clear, "Mrs. Garrison, I cannot intervene in a private business dispute, especially one where you seem to be demanding special treatment that no other citizen gets." Patricia looked like she'd been slapped with a wet fish. She gasped, grabbing her pearls, literally grabbing her pearls, and shrieked, "Special treatment? I am protecting property values. I am." That night, the real counteroffensive began. Chloe and I didn't go home. We sat in the back office with pizza and energy drinks, and we started going through the public records of the Silver Creek HOA. It turns out, when you're that arrogant, you get sloppy. We found inconsistencies in the budget, community outreach funds that suspiciously matched the cost of luxury gas fills, landscaping fees paid to a company owned by her brother-in-law, and legal fees for lawsuits that were never actually filed. We compiled it all, every receipt, every strange withdrawal, every lie, and we sent it to the one person we knew would care more than anyone, Mr. Henderson, the HOA vice president, a man Patricia had bullied into silence for years. The next morning, the atmosphere at the gas station was electric, but not because of a protest. The picket line was gone. The signs were gone. Instead, there was just a steady stream of cars from Silver Creek, neighbors coming in not to buy gas, but to shake my hand, to buy a candy bar, to whisper, "Thank you." They had seen the video. They had seen the proof, and they were done. Round 10 a.m., a convoy of cars pulled up. But it wasn't Patricia this time. It was the rest of the HOA board, led by Mr. Henderson. Looking grim and determined, they walked into the store, not with anger, but with purpose. Mr. Henderson approached the counter, cleared his throat, and said, "Son, we owe you an apology. We didn't know the extent of it. We thought she was just being zealous. We didn't know she was using the association as her personal piggy bank and battering ram." He laid a letter on the counter. "We held an emergency vote last night. effective immediately. Patricia Garrison has been removed as president and is facing a forensic audit of her spending. I felt my knees go weak, the relief washing over me like cold water after a marathon. She's gone, I asked, voice cracking a little. She's gone, Henderson confirmed, and will be paying for any lost revenue from the last few days out of the administrative fund. It won't happen again, but the story wasn't quite over because people like Patricia, they don't just fade away, they have to have the last word. That evening, just as the sun was setting and casting those long, orange shadows across the pumps, a lone car pulled up. It was the white SUV. My heart jumped into my throat, my hands instinctively reaching for the phone to call Deputy Miller. But she didn't get out screaming. She stepped out slowly, wearing sweatpants, and no makeup, looking smaller, older. Deflated, she walked up to the window, not coming inside, just standing on the other side of the glass. I walked out wary, ready for a fight, but she just looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed, and said, almost in a whisper, I built that neighborhood. I made it perfect. I gave my life to those rules. She wasn't talking to me, really. She was talking to the universe, trying to justify the chaos she caused. You can't just break the rules, she mumbled. Chaos. It invites chaos. I looked at her, this woman who had tried to ruin me over $20 of gas. And I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt pity. Mrs. Garrison, I said softly, rules are there to help people live together, not to control them. You forgot the people part. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. Not as a servant or an obstacle, but as a person, and she nodded, a jerky, broken little nod. She got back in her car, paid at the pump with a credit card, her own card, and drove away into the twilight, leaving Silver Creek behind. The aftermath was like waking up from a fever dream. The station went back to normal, but it was better than normal. We became the neighborhood spot. People from the HOA started coming in regularly, joking about the revolution of Pump 4, bringing us cookies, treating us like actual human beings. I got a raise from corporate for exceptional crisis management, which was nice, and Chloe got promoted to shift lead because, frankly, she's a genius. But the biggest change was in the neighborhood itself. Without Patricia's iron grip, the fences started getting painted different colors. People planted wildflowers instead of approved begonias. I even saw a tricycle left in a driveway overnight, and nobody called the cops. It was like the whole place exhaled. It's funny, you know? You go through life thinking these petty little tyrants have all the power, that you just have to keep your head down and take it, because they have the titles and the clipboards. But the truth is, their power is fragile. It's built on the assumption that nobody will ever say no. All it took was one person refusing to be bullied, one person standing behind a counter saying, you have to pay like everyone else, to bring the whole house of cards down. So I guess the lesson is, don't let the Patricias of the world tell you who you are. Don't let them convince you that their rules outweigh your dignity. Stand your ground. Keep your receipts. And if you have a smart-aleck co-worker with a cell phone, keep her close, because she might just save your life. Anyway, that's my story. It was a hell of a week, and I'm just glad I can go back to worrying about this slushy machine breaking down, instead of being arrested. But I'm curious, have you guys ever had to deal with someone like Patricia? And a nightmare or a boss who thought they were God? How did you handle it? Did you fight back? Or did you find a way to outsmart them? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And honestly, I could use a few stories to make me feel like I'm not the only one who's been through the ringer. Stay safe out there, folks, and remember, pay for your gas.